Antonio. To manipulate history is to manipulate consciousness. And to manipulate consciousness is to manipulate power. And to manipulate power is to manipulate possibilities. Welcome to the show. We got a great show for you today. We're introducing family, a newcomer to our show. And I'm sure somewhere down the line, you guys is going to partake in and enjoy this guy. We had some talks, and he's wanted to come on the show and do a little series. So I'll probably, if his schedule allow, probably have him back on the show in 2 weeks and starting to discuss several things of points of interest to enlighten us. And a great brother, a good addition to the family. So you want to lock in and stay tuned to what's going on. Today outside, I think it's kind of, we're going to have a funny little weekend is up in here, up in Cleveland. I know folks are getting ready, getting set up, and want to get outside and do their thing. But hey, the weather might get in the way a little bit, but y'all got to learn how to dodge those raindrops. But it'll be all right. We want to constantly remind you, the Carter G. Woodson Project and the Inner City Juneteenth Coalition. We're doing that emoji parade downtown on the 29th of June. Come on down and represent. And I want to say the original people downtown doing something for Juneteenth. We didn't have to get permission from the man to celebrate June. We've been celebrating Juneteenth down there for 12 years. So y'all come on down there and show out and participate and let folks know that we can represent ourselves downtown in Cleveland. I'm talking about the African American community. And then on the 23rd, we got to remind you guys about the Juneteenth ball, the African ball. So you can give me a call at 216-323-6155 for vending space. And if you want to get tickets to the ball, come on out. Let's represent, because we always take these times to educate as well. It's not all about celebration. We want to keep Juneteenth open to information, learning, and things like that. Not just a day off and a rib-toting holiday. No. We're going to use this for something to educate ourselves and empower ourselves. In the remote studio, I got my co-host, Brother Vince. What's going on, Brother Vince?
Well, my brother, you just stumbled upon a treasure chest of knowledge, information, and medical information above everything else. Well, no, I don't want to say that, because he's an African-centered physician, and we're so pleased to have him with us today. And I'll just be completely transparent, brother. I don't know how you met Lynn. I don't know how you met this brother, but after reading his bio, I'm absolutely glad to be able to have this conversation today, and I look forward to further and future conversations with him. He is Dr. Burnett Quadwo Gallman, and his resume, his biography is so impressive. I wish I could share it with you, but it's like a biography. It's a few pages long, so there's too much to share with you right now, but I will let you know that he's a native of Hartsville, South Carolina. He's a graduate of Benedict College in Columbia, South Carolina. As a physician, he's focused on health and the well-being of humanity. He researches the causes of racial health disparities so that they can be eliminated and optimal health can be achieved. As an amateur historian, he has studied, taught, lectured, and written on topics as varied as ancient Kemetic history and culture, West African history, and the history and culture of Africans from the United States of America. I'm going to leave it right there and introduce you to Dr. Burnett Quadwo Gallman. Thanks for joining us today, brother.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored.
All right, brother.
The honor is totally ours. Like I said, I hope this begins a long-lasting relationship, between and you and I. We're going to tell the listeners right now. Doc expressed the interest of coming back on and doing a lecture series, so you definitely want to stay posted for that as well. So, Doc, I got the chance to look at some of your materials. We're gonna have this is an introduction to our family, our Cleveland family, or our Facebook family, YouTube family. That we've been doing our best, as we can to enlighten folks, to empower folks, to encourage folks just to do some research about who we are, because there is a serious effort, for a long time. Folks have spent a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of energy in keeping us in the dark about it. I mean, it's to the point we don't even know what we should be even fighting for, because so many things is coming out, and so many things is coming out around the globe about what's going on. And I think it's really going to hurt them real hard when they find out all the black presence, in Europe, because everywhere we go on this planet, it keep coming up black, and they having some issues with that. And I think this is why we having this pushback on history, So Doc, in your own words, I read one of your articles about we having the same debate that some of our great leaders in the past have been talking about, and it seemed like we're going around in the circle. And we talked about before we came on the show about Dr. Amos Wilson. Now, I like this quote right here, and I think it says a lot. He said, "If we don't teach our children to fix some of our current issues, then where are we? What are we doing? We on this treadmill of revamping and going through the same thing over and over again." So your thoughts on this, having these same debates in 2024? How do we get off that treadmill, Doc?
I think one of the problems one of the many problems that we have is the fact that we are so sensitive about hurting white folks' feelings.
Okay.
And I think that once we get over that and deal with the truth, and not necessarily in a mean or malicious way, but the plain and simple truth, with the history factions that are going around now, I think it's very interesting. One of the arguments they make is that true history would hurt poor little white folks,
yes,
children's feelings. And the fact is that I think the feelings ought to be hurt, simply because hurt feelings can potentially create an improvement. And I think that, number one, I think we have to really concentrate more on our truths, our feelings, than trying to prevent us from hurting somebody else's feelings, especially when they've had historically absolutely no. Actually, I was going to say one thing, but they've actually had contempt for our feelings.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact is that I'm drawn to a quote from Chancellor Williams' book, which is, I think, foundational. It's called Destruction of Black Civilization. I'm sure you all are aware of it. But there's a quote in his book that I think is very, very useful. And I'm going to paraphrase it. He said that one thing that we have to realize is that white people are our enemies. And he said, this is not the ranting of wide-eyed militancy, but the calm evaluation of 2,000 years of recorded history. So I think that we have to recognize that. And I mean, what sane person tries to spare his enemy's feelings?
Got the point. I mean, how many years? How many years, Doc, that a person have to show you that they don't have your best interest? We're still finding things that has been done to us to set us back so many generations, even today. You know what I mean? I talk about the Devil's Punch Bowl. You talk about how many cities that's been burnt down because of some crazy contempt or some lies that's been told. Those things are just not coming out, Doc. That's been buried. What about the last ship in, well, I think it was Alabama, was it?
The Clotilda.
Yeah, well, what was it, Alabama? I think it was Alabama.
Yeah,
Alabama.
Yeah, Mobile, Alabama.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and all these things are starting to surface, and I think maybe they're getting a little shaky and nervous because our ancestors talked about all shall be revealed, and the truth is going to come out. So when you talked about hurting feelings, what about our children? being depicted as monkeys, being, showing these negative images all their life about themselves. Well, even to today, when put up with the choices of, do you like the black doll or the white doll, they still choosing the white doll. Look at the psychological effect that has been taking place so long far as our children. But like you said, forget our children. We worried about their children. So I think we just really slipping with critical analysis of, I don't know if we dealing with the Willie Lynch or the Stockholm syndrome or what, but something is impeding our judgment, our knowledge, or we just in love and romanticizing this system.
I think we definitely have Stockholm syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
I think there are degrees of it. You have the umpteenth degrees as exemplified by people on the Supreme Court and in Congress. But then you also have the regular variety rather than the severe variety that sometimes you and I may find ourselves stumbling.
Mm-hmm.
It's been very, very insidious over generations. And just think about it. I often think about that scene in the original Roots where the man beat Kunta Kinte to make him recognize Toby. And the fact is that when our ancestors first got here by the British, I would say, when they first got here, do you think they wanted to be American? That's a question that Dr. Anderson Thompson out of Chicago used to phrase beautifully. What did those ancestors who were kidnapped and separated from their homeland, from their families, who did they see themselves as being? Well, obviously, there was no such thing or concept to them as Africa, but they were Yoruba, they were God, they were Asante, they were Ndobe. They were all types of different African ethnic groups, but they didn't see themselves as American. They didn't see themselves as part of the individuals that were mistreating them, that were brutalizing, raping, and beating on them. So I think that over time, over generations, over the course of maybe 3 or 4 generations, the lack of education and the forced socialization created a way of thinking that was totally alien, whereas we still be African. We are much more African than we think we are. And that's why I think that I'm so glad, and I'm really getting ready to do some deep dives into this whole concept of epigenetics.
Yes.
Because we do be African.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that a lot of people don't want to be African. I hear so much, so many people saying, I ain't lost nothing in Africa. And I said, maybe not, but you lost your mind in America.
Okay.
Yeah, I was hoping you could explain Stockholm syndrome for the folks who don't know what that is.
Stockholm syndrome is a psychological condition in which someone who has been kidnapped or kept under captive conditions get to the point where they start sympathizing with their captors. And it's very well recognized. It was interesting because it got its name, and I forget the year, but there was a train held hostage in Stockholm, Sweden, and for a period of time, and again, I don't remember the length of time, but when it was over, many of the hostages actually took the sides of their captors, kidnappers. and it's a recognized thing. Um, those of you who may be old enough to remember Patty Hearst, remember that she got off because they used that as defense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, the fact is that the fact that they recognized it as a thing and
Mm-hmm.
used it means that they do recognize it as a thing. And we are subject to that because we have been under their power educationally, psychologically, sociologically, psych, and for what, 15, 20 generations?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
with each generation passing, we lose a little bit of ourselves, which is why, as Dr. Asa Hill used to say, we are the new Maroons. The two of you, me, and countless others that are out here beating our heads up against the wall, trying to create a system of truth. So we are the new Maroons, as Asa said. We are the ones that are fighting to maintain our Africanity and to shed a spotlight on other people
Mm-hmm.
so that they would realize that they're African and not be ashamed of such mundane things as how they look.
Right.
So
And to add to that, the whole Stockholm piece is that the funny thing is when these captors or the ones that's been conquered or subject to all this psychological folly that's been going on, when they become in charge, they act just like the people that captured them.
absolutely.
That's the crazy thing about it. Rather than going and free themselves or going, they've been so psychologically duped at this particular point. When free, they act just like the slave owners or whatever, treating their people almost like how some of those people went back to Liberia and did what they did. They brought those particular ways and habits back and treated their own the same way they've been taught. Because that reminds me of something I believe Dr. Whitaker said, that was just, you know, shocked me with and even thinking about that. Like if we in this country ever became free and running things and light skinned folks, as far as demographics is concerned, leave and we running this stuff, how are we the elites, the ones those talented tens is going to take on the same mindset as the ones that was previously governing us, so nothing won't change. They'll just continue and go 2.0 on, and treating us the way we've been treated.
I put it another way. If every white person on the face of the earth were to disappear, white supremacy would continue.
We'll continue. Wow. See, that's fearful right there. But
Yeah.
Doc, I want to take it. I want to because I'm gonna jab at you with a little bit of this, a little bit of that, so we're gonna be all over the place a little bit.
Cool.
Um, I was reading the article to. No, I was listening to one of your videos, and you brought up a couple things that historically in this country that I thought was interesting that people needed to know, like Henry Garnett. I believe he was he kind of indifferent with was it Frederick Douglass? Is that the one that with Frederick Douglass? Yeah, and then
Yeah.
there was another one with Booker T. They had different ideologies and way they was looking almost like a Malcolm and a Martin type of thing that people really don't know about, and it's just that one of them got more press than the other. Could you speak on that a little bit,
Sure.
so we can research these people these that we need to know about what was going down in this country back then?
Henry Allen Garnett is actually one of my heroes. He was a Presbyterian minister whose family escaped from enslavement, and I think he settled near Pittsburgh. And he actually he no, I'm wrong. It's Martin Delany that settled in Pittsburgh.
Mhm.
But Garnett actually was a very fiery Presbyterian minister. And during the early part of the 19th century, there used to be what was called the Negro Convention movement, where non-enslaved Africans would get together and debate the events of the time to come to decisions on what action should be taken. And it was ironic that Garnett favored armed resistance. And he said, they can't do no more to you than they're already doing. Um, Whereas Frederick Douglass, who was the darling of the white abolitionist community, uh, used every method that he had to oppose Garnett. And what's interesting is that after a period of time, when Garnett got frustrated and left the country, I think he moved to Liberia, where he eventually transitioned. Shortly after that, Frederick Douglass appropriated all the positions that he had previously gone against. He's known for that speech, that quotation where he talks about you need violence. If you resist without violence, it's like the roar of the ocean. I forget exactly what it said, but he actually spoke up against that. And there were a lot of small points that Garnett believed in, that Garnett spoke on at these conferences that Douglass, and I think it was in 1843 at a conference when Garnett made a very, very impassioned um, speech, and he ended it with, "Let your motto be resistance, resistance, resistance." And Douglass undermined him, and they took a vote, and I think Douglass's position won out by one vote. Another of their disagreements was the role of white people in our struggle. And Garnett said, "I don't oppose white folk helping us, but they need to go to their community." And they need to help their community, because their community is where the problem is. They don't need to come into our meetings.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Frederick Douglass said, "No, we need to invite them in everything we do." And that was a big thing that I'm not aware of it ever being completely resolved, but I'm also not aware of any white people attending any of those conferences either. And Garnett also, I'm trying to think of the name of the book, and you might be able to help me, brother. The book that was written by the North Carolina, where he was Boston based from North Carolina, who wrote David Walker. Mm-hmm. David Walker's appeal was lost, and Henry Highland Garnett discovered it and republished it. And that's one of the reasons why it's available now, mm-hmm. because of the efforts of Henry Highland Garnett.
You know was interesting, and that's one of the things that I wanted to talk to Brother Smalls about. I guess, with this psychological warfare, it's, I mean, you just can see it in all facets, and their job and their role is to keep you psyched out and believe in a certain type of way, because it's a fallacy that there was no resistance. The slaves didn't fight back. I throw this little quote out that, what do y'all think was going over in Africa when we was going through our atrocities over here? Like the Africans was, at the beach partying and having a good time while we was going through. I mean, it was so many revolts here. There were so many revolts over in Africa, and that's another part of history that we can say is lost. So is that another psychological piece, not to get us to, because anybody that came up about religious being resistance, like he was just saying, they're militant, they throw all these bad names on them, and people need to know that folks just didn't sit back and just take this stuff.
In my last lecture, actually, was on resistance, and you mentioned Amos Wilson and something that he said in a lecture many years ago. And actually, it wasn't in a lecture. It was in an interview he did with my very good friend, Listerville Middleton.
Mm-hmm.
And interestingly, for the listeners, if you ever, Listerville Middleton did a program that was broadcast from South Carolina Educational Television called For the People.
Mm-hmm.
And he interviewed all the scholars. And we're in an effort now to try to get them to make those available. But if anybody is interested, you can go to South Carolina ETV and order them, or you can go to YouTube. A lot of his on YouTube. That being said, when he interviewed Amos Wilson said that many of us labor under the impression that white folk can't be defeated, and that is really one of the major weapons that they have against us. The fact is that until they invented what was then a weapon of mass destruction, the Gatling gun or the Maxim gun, Africans were fighting them off. But when they invented these repeating weapons that they could kill at a distance, kill multiple people at a distance in a short time, that's when the tide turned. And so that African resistance was there. We know about Njinga, and there's a lot of information about her that's out there. But then there were other African freedom fighters, many of whom eventually lost because of the Maxim gun and the Gatling gun. Africans here, we were bombarded with that old trope of the happy slave, and all and what was so insidious about that was, I'm kind of long in the tooth, so I remember cartoons that were available for children at that time that exemplified those old racist tropes of the happy slave, the mammy, the rastas, the no good. But what happens is that Africans had so many different ways of resisting, so many different ways. And I think Dr. Karenga divided them into passive and active. For those Africans who believed in the system and they believed that white people really believed what white people said, they would write petitions to the government. And in my lecture, I list about maybe 8 or 9 of those petitions from Boston to South Carolina. None of them were ever honored or successful. Then we did work slowdowns. We played dumb. We destroyed tools. We destroyed crops. And women, after a point, after 1808, the importation of Africans for slavery was outlawed. So that started a new industry, and that was breeding Africans. So that when an African woman was purchased, she was worth more than just her labor. She was, in fact, Thomas Jefferson actually has a famous quote saying that an African woman's children made her much more valuable. And I imagine he should know. But that being said, I think that African women found ways to abort themselves. They found ways of preventing pregnancy. And interestingly, there's some evidence that African women actually kill their children. And that is painted as uh, an act of desperation to prevent the child from undergoing this slavery. But I see it as an act of rebellion. I see it as not as an act of desperation, but as an act of defiance. Um, uh, in order to fight back against that. We know about suicides. We know about rebellions. There were literally hundreds of rebellions that some have been recorded, others have not. Um, the ones we hear about are the rebellions like uh, Denmark Vesey in South Carolina, the Stono Rebellion here in South Carolina, Gabriel Prosser in Virginia, and so forth, Nat Turner in Virginia. But there were literally many, many more um, rebellions and plans to rebel. One of the things that was a little dismaying to me, but is consistent with what we've been talking about, is the fact that many of those were betrayed by enslaved Africans.
Mm-hmm.
And which gets back to that illness, that Stockholm syndrome. Um, I think Malcolm used to say, when the master was sick, those folk would say, "We sick, boss."
Right.
Uh, and one of the things that when the master's house was on fire, uh, the Africans prayed for wind, and the Negroes prayed for rain.
Absolutely. Before I turn it over and bring my good brother in, if you could briefly uh, uh, enlighten people a little bit on another forgotten hero, not talked about, Martin Delany.
Martin Delany, to my way of thinking, was the Imhotep of his age. The word multi-genius. Martin Delany, I don't think Martin Delany was ever enslaved. Martin Delany was one of those people. I heard someone speaking just the other day. I think it may have been Greg Carr, uh, Daniel Black. I forget who, but they were saying that there are people who are not necessarily in love with blackness, but they ally with folk because they hate whiteness.
Mm-hmm.
And Martin Delany was someone who loved blackness. As a matter of fact, Frederick Douglass used to say about Martin Delany, uh, Frederick Douglass said, "I thank God made me a man, but Delany thanks God for making him a black man."
Mm-hmm.
And it was said that he was jealous of anybody with a darker complexion than he had. Martin Delany was a newspaper man. He actually organized a newspaper called The Mystery in Pittsburgh. And Frederick Douglass made a trip to Pittsburgh and convinced Delany to close down his newspaper to help Frederick Douglass with his newspaper. And because they were so diametrically different in their approaches, obviously that partnership didn't last very long. But they were contemporaries, and there's some evidence that during the time that they both lived, Delany was much more popular in the African community than Douglass was. Douglass was more popular and well known in the white / abolitionist community. Delany was a physician. He was actually, oh no, you said brief. I'm sorry. I could go on.
Hey man,
I'm sorry.
I was taking it all in there, my brothers. But what we would do is encourage our listeners to definitely look up some information about Martin Delany. Because Yeah, I think he gets lost in the sauce as well, as far as historically and what some of his accomplishments and his viewpoints and ideology on this whole movement of freeing our mind and freeing us physically and everything else. Brother Vince, I know you've been
Yeah,
sitting there biting at the bit.
yeah. I just couple of things. I just want to remind folks that you are listening to 360 Info Network right here on AM 1490 WERE. Our guest is Dr. Burnett Gallman. He is not only a physician, but he's also an African-centered historian. We definitely appreciate that perspective. I would like to encourage those of you who are watching us on YouTube and Facebook to like and subscribe to our pages, as it helps us significantly when it comes to carrying out this mission of bringing this information to you. Um, Dr. Gallman, you have opened up quite a few things for us to talk about. I'm looking at a list of subjects that you're versed on, and I noticed at the top of the list is rites of passage. And we have conversations about rites of passage a lot because rites of passage, as we see it, and I'm speaking on behalf of my brother Lynn here, is one of the key ingredients to the success of us as a people, because it gives us a certain perspective of self-awareness and identity. We were talking at the top of the hour about how some of us refuse to be African, some of us are ashamed to be Africans, but it doesn't prevent us from being Africans because it's in our genealogy. You also mentioned your interest in epigenetics, and I'm reminded of a sister who was in Silver Spring, Maryland, who was one of the top genome scientists in the world. And I'm speaking of Dr. Georgia Dunstan. But I'm just curious from you, uh, what's your take on how important rites of passage is in our community?
Rites of passage are essential. That's the word that I'm looking for. They're essential. Um, my connection with rites of passage goes back many, many years. As a matter of fact, when I was in private practice, I used to have a program every summer whereby students who voiced an interest in going into medicine could shadow me. That was before a lot of the privacy laws were passed, which kind of curtailed that. But they would follow me into the hospital and observe procedures if the patients consented. They would go into the exam room if the patient consented. And it was interesting. Over the years, I probably had several hundred students to to go through that program. And what was interesting
Great.
is that
That's great. I got to stop you there, Doc.
uh,
That's wonderful, brother. Continue, man. Wonderful.
but was it?
Go ahead.
I chuckled because only three of them actually went on to become doctors
That's all right, though,
because
but
they
just
saw what the
experience.
life was about. But I can
Mhm.
proudly say that the overwhelming majority of them graduated from college and got advanced degrees um, and are working in the good of their community, because I not only exposed them to medicine, but I was a teacher before I went to medical school, so I would give them assignments to, and each one of them know all about Henry Highland Garnett, Imhotep, Lady Pesichet, Martin Delaney, and so on. So I would give them those things. And I ran into a brother who became one of my best friends by the name of Joe Benton. He is now an ancestor, but he actually was running a rites of passage program um, for the state. And he was slick now because he I don't know how he did it, but he managed to have a program for former offenders. He worked in the juvenile justice system, and he had a program for former offenders. But basically, what he was doing was African centered rites of passage. We hooked up with a third brother, Baba Derek Jackson, who is actually now my pastor in our Kemetic temple. And he was doing, with some friends of his, he was doing a program where they were doing rites of passage. And the three of us got together, and not only did we become lifelong best friends, but we published a book called Project Sankofa, which is a book uh, available on my website, but it's also available on Amazon. Um, and let me mention Amazon. I sent copies of some of my books to every Black-owned bookstore that I could think of that I could find on the internet, asking them if they would consider selling my book. I heard from none, zero, zip, zilch. So I will go with what I can do, and that is Amazon. Well, this book, Project Sankofa, actually last year it went into its second expanded printing, um, and we deal with philosophy and theory behind rites of passage, as well as giving some tips on starting a rites of passage program that have worked for us. And we use several people as guides. I think there was a brother by the name of Paul Hill who has written extensively and has had very successful rites of passage over the years. So we studied his methods, and then Wade Nobles had a program they called the Hawk Program in Oakland, California. And Dr. Jeffries and Professor Smalls had a program in Harlem they called the Sons of Africa. So we took a little bit of all of that and added our own ideas and experiences and came up with Project Sankofa. And it is it's been very successful. And I think that, you know, there's a sister out of New York that actually has done a whole web series on the book. So I'd like to think that it has helped to um, open people's eyes about the whole idea of rites of passage. You know, one of the things we said, nothing just happens. You know, just because someone reaches a certain age, it don't make you a man. As a matter of fact, I know a whole bunch of 60-year-old boys. So, you know, manhood is something that I think has to be trained for. And in another iteration of my life, I had an opportunity to work with a group of people that I consider to be my Jegnas. And one of those was Baba Hannibal Afrique, who spoke about being initiated into eldership. And his point was just because you reached a certain age, it didn't automatically make you an elder. Right. And in my not my last book, but the book before last, I have a chapter where I talk about that. I put forth a lot of different ideas. So I think rites of passage is something that is very, very important, but it's also something that's been abused. When we were doing rites of passage, and we don't do it anymore. We prefer to train trainers. So what we've been doing is training trainers to do rites of passage in our technique. But during the time that we were still conducting rites of passage programs, there was actually a guy. There was a guy here in Columbia who was an attorney that did a rites of passage program over a single weekend. I mean, you can't do it.
Yeah.
And but then he as I said, he was an attorney. He had knowledge, he had contacts, and he got big buck funded.
Mm, mm,
And we basically were working for free.
mhm.
Uh, and interestingly, I think that part of the brainwashing that we've been through, um, we're at a point where we don't respect something that's free.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Paul Hill Jr., who happens to be someone who lives here in Cleveland, Ohio. He has the National Rites of Passage Institute. His
Mhm.
son is very involved in mentoring and rites of passage, I believe, in Baltimore, Maryland. And I know through my acquaintance with Mr. Hill and another good friend of mine, Stephen E. Boyd, we have conversations about how rites of passage was an integral part of the education process here in Cleveland. They had a lot of involvement with rites of passage, but over a period of time, you saw it dwindle down to practically almost nothing. uh, we have established that it's really important for our community, but we're getting the pushback on rites of passage, just like we're getting a pushback on our awareness and knowledge of history. Another subject that you're very versed in is the environmental aspect of racism that we deal with. Just curious from your perspective, what can be done to re-energize the concept of rites of passage in our education system?
I don't think it can be done in the educational system at this point. I think we need to use the avenues that we have available through churches, temples, mosques, and even synagogues, because bar mitzvah and bat mitzvahs are rites of passage programs that the ancient Israelites learned from our Kemetic ancestors.
Mhm.
So, again, that's something that we can do. I think community groups need to start that. We have a lot of community groups that get together for various reasons. And I think rites of passage is something we're looking at. As a matter of fact, here in the Midlands of South Carolina, we have an organization entitled the Catalyst Mbangi. And the Catalyst Mbangi is kind of a think tank of several African centered organizations and businesses. And we do things like one of our members is the Juneteenth planners. Another, we have the National Association of Black Social Workers chapter. We have the local chapter of ASCAC, the Association of for Study of Classical African Civilizations. Um, we have a local Kemetic Institute here, and we're looking at um, some of those things that are very, very important.
Mhm.
Uh, and rites of passage is something that we've talked about. We haven't really gotten into it yet because there's an African Center school that is a member of the Mbangi that that's doing just a fantastic job teaching children not only pride, but teaching them practically how to survive. These children learn anything from farming to plumbing to electricity to history,
Mhm.
and it's awesome.
Mhm.
Um, so uh, I think we have to use the avenues that are easiest for us to reinstitute rites of passage, because uh, what is it, Mothers for Liberty have taken over local school boards, and so that that's a constant fight that we have to be very vigilant.
But do you think, Doc? Me, brother Kaba Kamene, and I'm of the same opinion about us doing it ourselves. I don't know if we're ever going to get to that particular point, and you just suggested that rites of passage may not be a good fit for our curriculum in our schools again. But I just find it hard, and I say this often with the people that we consider so-called, our talented 10 or scholars, the Cornell Westers and Gates of our community, not being aware of how important it is for us to teach our own children, and not supporting those efforts, and being able to grab those dollars and make that thing happen across the country. I just find it very disappointing and odd that people supposed to be so-called of education don't understand the importance of being able to teach your own children their version of history, because look at so much stuff that is coming out that has been untold, and the Tyler Perrys of the people, of the community, that how many stories that could be told about our perseverance, our dedication, our devotion, our spirituality. It could go on and on stories to be told about us. And I find it very hard that our people is not, really engaging, the ones who have the ability to do it, really engaging and promoting those type of things. So we talked about, hey, we just use these churches or rec centers, whatever, to really tell our story. Your thoughts on that, Doc?
Absolutely. I agree 100% with that. It's interesting. We were hired once to do rites of passage in a alternative school here. And what was interesting was that our original program was based on young Black boys. And but in this alternative school, that they were actually the worst of the worst, supposedly. Um, but there were also some white students in there. And it was very interesting because the white students actually adapted, some of the white students actually adapted to the material and seemed to adjust to it and agree with it and adapt it much more than some of the African students, which I thought was interesting. And also in that program, let me mention, we were asked to do girls too. Now in our program, when we were actively doing rites of passage, we trained a group of women, our wives and some of the women in our local study group, to do rites of passage, and they would actually do girls. So what we would do, if there was for instance, we were hired by this church to do rites of passage one summer, and we would start out with the boys and girls together, then we would separate and do our thing, and then we'd come back together, and it was very successful. Um, so your point is very well taken. I think that we really have to use what we have to get what we need.
Absolutely. Rites of passage is critical. And, as you were explaining, I was just thinking about how education has really been a tool of oppression. And we keep going back to the same system that hasn't been operating in our best interest and expecting miracles. It's the classic definition of insanity. We're blessed to have schools such as the one that you mentioned here in Cleveland. We have Wings Academy. Dr. Quad David Whitaker is at the helm of that school, providing an African-centered education to students in the Cleveland Municipal School District. And we can see how much of a difference it makes. I mean, when you walk into a regular classroom or a regular school here in Cleveland, you walk through metal detectors. It's like you're walking into a prison. And we expect our children to adapt to these circumstances, but when they go to school, they feel more like hostages than they do students. Back in the day, they would design schools that didn't have windows that you could get out of. There's a school not far from here that they actually had to redo to build windows into the school, because those schools were also functioning as detention centers based on the King Arthur plan. I know you're aware of that historically, but those are some of the realities that we deal with. We're winding down our radio broadcast, so I just want to remind the listeners that you can continue to listen to our program as we migrate over to Facebook and YouTube. Let me also underscore the importance of subscribing to our channels. Lynn's or Hamtonio's channel is The Journey with Hamtonio. You can go to that YouTube channel and you can watch these broadcasts, like, comment, and subscribe to his channel. Also mine, and Dr. Gallman also has a YouTube channel too. So we'll make sure that he knows the next time we do this broadcast that he can actually plug into our network and share our content amongst his subscribers, and we can get the word out. Brother Lynn, any closing comments before we wind down the radio broadcast?
Yes, again, June 29th, come on out and celebrate Juneteenth. Now, like I say, the first and only parade that is taking place down in downtown Cleveland. So let's represent ourselves, because we know we just in the Asian festival. They're not going to come down in Luke Easter Park to spend a dime with our vendors. So that's why we're taking it downtown. And also, yes, we don't know how long Dr. Goldman is going to be able to stay, because I know that roundtable meeting that he talks about is like at 12:30 every Saturday. So we only going to possibly get Dr. Goldman on spurts of 1 hour blasts, So, but I don't know how much extra time he got, Brother Vince. But you can give his website to where they can get his books and follow him and get his information.
Absolutely. And we have about 55 seconds before we conclude the broadcast. You can go to mhotepthedrum.com. That's mhotepthedrum.com, and you can get more information. You can get access to his books. You can also go to amazon.com to get his books. Just want to give a shout out to our engineer, Tone Harley. He is the man at the controls. And thanks to him, we're able to do these broadcasts the way that we do. We're doing something revolutionary here in Cleveland, and we're bringing you content that can definitely make a difference in your lives. With all that said, as always, know yourself, love yourself, be yourself. Make today your absolute best day. Peace.
Peace. Peace.
Hotep.
All right, we've got about 3 seconds here. We are now streaming live exclusively to YouTube and Facebook. We have a 360 Info Network Facebook page, so you can watch us on Facebook. You can also go to my YouTube channel, which is Vince Robinson on YouTube. And again, The Journey with Hamtonio on YouTube as well. You can see all of these African-centered scholars that we bring your way, as well as folks in our Cleveland community talking about issues such as environmental racism and a long list of other things that Dr. Gallman has on his website. And I'm telling you, man, I looked at your bio. I saw all the different lanes that you were traveling in, and I was just absolutely amazed. And then you're down there in South Carolina in proximity to our dear brother, James Small, who is Geechee Gullah. He came up in that tradition and has had such a magical life as well. It's great to know that you are acquainted with him and you have a similar mission in life that ties to the importance of history. I noticed also that you are immersed in the history of Africa, and I think there's definitely a relationship to Kemet, as Imhotep is one of the words that's in your website. Last week we had Michael Imhotep on, and the week before that we had Asar Imhotep and Michael Imhotep on. So it seems to be a theme in the broadcasts that we've been building. Just want to give you an opportunity to talk about the importance of African history. And you mentioned Henry Highland Garnett. I was thinking about how many times we've seen two brothers kind of juxtaposed against each other. Like we had W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington. And you mentioned Martin Delany and his counterpart. We have all these different counterparts that kind of oppose each other. And then, as Malcolm and Martin did, they come closer to connecting with each other's philosophy. Many people don't know that Dr. King actually had a handgun, and he had to be talked into giving up the handgun because he was such a proponent of nonviolence. But at the same time, he had his own gun. Just talk to us about the importance of African-centered education in our community.
Well, I'm going to really have to go.
Yeah, yes, I was wondering about
but briefly, let me just say that if it ain't about you, it ain't for you. And the fact is that African-centered education, and again, part of the education that we have received at the hand of our enemies has made us ashamed of our Africanity.
Absolutely.
And one of the organizations in the Mbangi that I mentioned earlier is the South Carolina Organization of African Unity. And that organization is an organization of Africans from, I think we have 16 different African countries now, Africans from Jamaica, Haiti, and Trinidad, as well as what we call AUSA, Africans from the United States of America. And it's obvious that the work that has been done to keep us apart has been very, very good. My roommate in medical school was Nigerian, and he often would talk about how when he first came to this country, he was told to avoid African Americans because we didn't like them and we were violent and we were all this and all that. And I thought that was interesting. But then in talking to some of the younger native-born Africans, continental Africans, we call them, many of them have been told the same thing about us. So it's that one of those things, let's you and him fight, divide and conquer. And so part of the aim of that organization is to try to eliminate that divergence and turn it into a convergence so that we can get together and then get into a word that we haven't mentioned specifically, but we've been talking about all morning, is Pan-Africanism. So that we can all understand that we all do be the same. Brother Geechee here. We all do be the same.
Do be the same.
We need to behave like that. And I'm sorry, gentlemen, I'm just going to have to.
Yes, no problem, my brother.
I'd be more than happy to come back. As you can tell, I like to run my mouth.
Yeah. I'll call you up and we'll talk about a topic, and we can start at least a 2 or 3 week series. Something like that.
That's a bet.
All right.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks for joining us.
All right. You all take care.
You too.
All righty.
All righty, sir.
Well, that was extensive in a relatively short period of time.
I know. Yeah, right. I was trying. I told him I was just gonna plug a little here and there, just to introduce him to the audience, to our audience. So that was cool. It was cool.
Okay. Before you go, let me just ask how you connected with him.
Oh yeah, through one of my other scholars. Yeah, they mentioned his name, and so I said, all right, that sounds like somebody we can bring on. Yeah,
okay.
So I just reached out to him. Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, glad that you came across this brother. There's definitely knowledge that he can share with us, and we will continue to bring these heavyweights to our listening audience here in Cleveland and around the world. As always, know yourself, love yourself, be yourself. Make today your absolute best day. Peace, everyone.
Peace. All right.